Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Screams, Volume 2, edited by Brian James Freeman and Richard Chismer. Narrated by Joe Barrett. The Deep End, by Robert McCammon. Summer was dying. The late afternoon sky wept rain from low, hovering clouds, and Glenn Calder sat in his Chevy station wagon, staring at the swimming pool where his son had drowned 2 weeks ago. Neil was just 16 years old, Glenn thought. His lips were tight and gray, and the last of his summer tan had faded from his gaunt, hollowed face. Just 16. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, the knuckles bleaching white. It's not fair. My son is dead, and you're still alive. Oh, I know you're there. I figured it all out. You think you're so damn smart. You think you've got everybody fooled, but not me. Oh, no, not me. He reached over the seat beside him and picked up his pack of Winstons, chose a cigarette, and clamped the filter between his lips. Then he punched the cigarette lighter in and waited for it to heat up. His eyes, pale blue behind a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, remained fixed on the Olympic-sized public swimming pool beyond the high chain-link fence. A sign on the admissions gate said in big, cheerful red letters, "Closed for the season. See you next summer." Beyond the fence were bleachers and sun decks where people had lolled in the hot, sultry summer of North Alabama, and there was a bandstand where an occasional rock band had played at a pool party on a Saturday night. Steam rose from the glistening concrete around the pool, and in the silence between the patter of raindrops, with his windows rolled down and the moody smell of August's last hours inside the car, he thought he could hear ghostly music from that bandstand, there under the red canopy where he himself had danced as a kid in the late 50s. He imagined he could hear the shouts, squeals, and rowdy laughter of the generations of kids that had come to this pool here in wooded Parnell Park since it had been dug out and filled with water back in the mid-40s. He cocked his head to one side, listening, and he felt sure that one of these ghostly voices belonged to Neil, and Neil was speaking like a ripple of water down a drain, calling, "Dad, Dad! It killed me, Dad. I didn't drown. I was always a good swimmer, Dad. You know that, don't you?" "Yes," Glenn answered softly, and tears filled his eyes. "I know that." The lighter popped out. Glenn got his cigarette going and returned the lighter to the dashboard. He stared at the swimming pool as a tear crept down his cheek. Neil's voice ebbed and faded, joining the voices of the other ghosts that were forever young in Parnell Park. If he had $1 for every time he'd walked through that admissions gate, he'd be a mighty rich man today. At least he'd have a lot more money, he mused, than running the pet center at Brook Hill Mall paid him. But he'd always liked animals, so that was okay. Though when he'd been young enough to dream, he'd had plans of working for a zoo in a big city like Birmingham, traveling the world and collecting exotic animals. His father had died when he was a sophomore at the University of Alabama, and Glenn had returned to Barrymore Crossing and gone to work because his mother had been hanging on the edge of a nervous breakdown. He'd always planned on going back to college, but the spool of time just kept unwinding. He'd met Linda, and they'd fallen in love. And then they'd gotten married, and Neil was born 4 years later, and... well, that was just the story of life, wasn't it? There were little flecks of rain on his glasses, caused when the drops ricocheted off the edge of the rolled-down window. Glenn took his glasses off to wipe the lenses with a handkerchief. Without the glasses, everything was kind of fuzzy, but he could still see all right. His hands were trembling. He was afraid, but not terrified. Funny. He'd thought for sure he'd be scared shitless. Of course, it wasn't time yet. Oh, no, not yet. He put his glasses back on, drew deeply at his cigarette, and let the smoke leak from his mouth. Then he touched the heavy-duty chain cutter that lay on the seat beside him. Today, the last day of summer, he had brought his own admission ticket to the pool. Underneath his trousers, he was wearing his bathing suit, the red one, the one that Linda said he'd better not wear around the bull up in Howard Mackey's pasture. Glenn smiled grimly. If he hadn't had Linda these past 2 weeks, it might have made him slip right off the deep end. She said they were strong, that they would go on and learn to live with Neil's death, and Glenn had agreed. But that was before he'd started thinking. That was before he'd started reading and studying about the Parnell Park swimming pool. That was before he knew. After Neil had drowned, the town council had closed the pool and park. Neil had been its third victim of the summer. Back in June, a girl named Wanda Shackelford had died in the pool, and on the 4th of July, it had been Tom Dunnigan. Neil had known Wanda Shackelford, and Glenn remembered that they'd talked about the incident at home one night. 17 years old, Glenn had said, reading from a copy of the Barrymore Crossing Courier. What a waste. He was sitting in his Barca-lounger in the den, and Linda was on the sofa doing her needlepoint picture for Sue Ann Moore's birthday. Neil was on the floor in a comfortable sprawl, putting together a plastic model of a spaceship he'd bought at Brook Hill Mall that afternoon. Says here that she and a boy named Paul Buckley decided to climb the fence and go swimming around midnight. He glanced over at Linda. Is that Alex Buckley's boy, the football player? I think so. Do you know Neil? Yeah, Paul Buckley's a center for Grissom High. Neil glued a triangular weapons turret together and put it aside to dry, then turned to face his father. Like Glenn, the boy was thin and lanky and wore glasses. Wanda Shackelford was his girlfriend. She would have been a senior next year. What else does it say? It's got a few quotes from Paul Buckley and the policeman who pulled the girl's body out. Paul says they'd had a six-pack and then decided to go swimming. He says he never even knew she was gone until he started calling her and she didn't answer. He thought she was playing a trick on him. He offered his son the paper. I can't imagine wanting to swim in dark water, Linda said. Her pleasant oval face was framed with pale blonde hair, and her eyes were hazel, the same color as Neil's. She concentrated on making a tricky stitch, and then looked up. That's the first one. The first one? What do you mean? Linda shrugged uneasily. I don't know, well, they say things happen in threes. She returned to her work. I think the city should fill in that swimming pool. Fill in the pool? There was alarm in Neil's voice. Why? Because last June the Happer boy drowned in it, remember? It happened the first weekend school was out. Thank God we weren't there to see it. And 2 summers before that, the McCarran girl drowned in 4 feet of water. The lifeguard didn't even see her go down before somebody stepped on her. She shivered and looked at Glenn. Remember? Glenn drew on his cigarette, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at the pool. Yes, he said softly. I remember. But at the time, he told Linda that people, especially kids, drowned in pools, ponds, and lakes every summer. People even drown in their own bathtubs, he'd said. The city shouldn't close Parnell Park Pool and deprive the people of Barrymore Crossing, Leeds, Cook Springs, and the other surrounding communities. Without Parnell Park, folks would have to drive either to Birmingham or go swimming in the muddy waters of nearby Logan Martin Lake on a hot summer afternoon. Still, he'd remembered that a man from Leeds had drowned in the deep end the summer before Gil McCarran's daughter died, and hadn't 2 or 3 other people drowned there as well? You think you're so damn smart, Glenn whispered, but I know. You killed my son, and by God you're going to pay. A sullen breeze played over the pool, and Glenn imagined he could hear the water giggle. Off in the distance, he was sure he heard Neil's voice, floating to him through time and space. It killed me, Dad. I didn't drown. I didn't. I... Glenn clamped a hand to his forehead and squeezed. Sometimes that made the ghostly voice go away, and this time it worked. He was getting a whopper of a headache, and he opened the glove compartment and took a half-full bottle of Excedrin from it. He popped it open, put a tablet on his tongue, and let it melt. Today was the last day of August, and tomorrow morning the city workmen would come and open the big circular metal-grated drain down in the 12-foot depths of the deep end. An electric pump would flood the water through pipes that had been laid down in 1945, when the pool was first dug out. The water would continue for more than 2 miles until it emptied into a cove on Logan Martin Lake. Glenn knew the route that water would take very well, because he'd studied the yellowed engineering diagrams in Barrymore Crossing City Hall. And then the last week of May, when the heat had come creeping back and summer was about to blaze like a nova, the pipes would start pumping Logan Martin Lake water back through another system of filtration tanks and sanitation filters, and when it spilled into the Parnell Park swimming pool, it would be fresh, clean, and sparkling. But it would not be lifeless. Glenn chewed a second Excedrin, crushed his cigarette out in the ashtray. This was the day. Tomorrow would be too late, because tomorrow the thing that lurked in the public swimming pool would slither away down the drain and get back to the lake, where it would wait in the mud for another summer season and the beckoning rhythm of the pump. Glenn's palms were wet. He wiped them on his trousers. Tom Dunnigan had drowned in the deep end on the 4th of July during the big annual celebration and barbecue. Glenn and Linda had been eating sauce-sloppy barbecues when they'd heard the commotion at the pool, and Linda had screamed, "Oh, my God, Neil!" But it was not Neil who lay on his back as the lifeguard tried to force breath back into the body. Neil had been doing cannonballs off the high dive when Tom's wife had shouted for help. The pool had been crowded with people, but no one had seen Tom Dunnigan slip under. He had not cried out, and not even left a ripple in the water. Glenn got close enough through the onlookers to see Tom's body as the lifeguard worked on him. Tom's eyes were open, and water was running between the pale blue lips. But Glenn had found himself staring at a small circular purple bruise at the back of Tom's neck, almost at the base of the brain. The bruise was pinpricked with scarlet, as if tiny veins in the skin had been ruptured. He'd wondered what could have caused a bruise like that, but it was so small it certainly wasn't important. Then the ambulance attendants wheeled Tom away, covered with a sheet, and the pool closed down for a week. It was later, much later, that Glenn realized the bruise could have been a bite mark. He'd been feeding a chameleon in the pet store when the lizard, which had turned the exact shade of green as the grass at the bottom of his tank, had decided to give him a bite on his finger. A chameleon has no teeth, but the pressure of the lizard's mouth had left a tiny circular mark that faded almost at once. Still, the little mark bothered Glenn until he'd realized what it reminded him of. He'd never really paid much attention to the chameleon before that, but suddenly he was intrigued by how it changed colors so quickly, from grass green to the tan shade of the sand heaped up in the tank's corner. Glenn put a large gray rock in there as well, and soon the chameleon would climb up on it and bloom gray. In that state it would be invisible but for the tiny, unblinking black circles of his eyes. "I know what you are," Glenn whispered. "Oh, yeah, I sure do." The light was fading. Glenn looked in the rear seat to check his gear, a snorkel, underwater mask, and fins. On the floorboard was an underwater light, a large flashlight sealed in a clear plastic enclosure with an upraised red off-on switch. Glenn had driven to the Kmart in Birmingham to buy the equipment in the sporting goods department. No one knew him there. And wrapped up in a yellow towel in the back seat was his major purchase. He reached over for it, carefully picked it up and put it across his lap. Then he began to unfold the towel, and there it was, clean, bright and deadly. "Looks wicked, doesn't it?" the Kmart clerk had asked. Glenn had agreed that it did, but then it suited his needs. "You couldn't get me underwater," the clerk had said. "No, sir. I like my feet on solid ground. What do you catch with that thing?" "Big game," Glenn had told him. "So big you wouldn't believe it." He ran his hands over the cool metal of the spear gun in his lap. He'd read all the warnings and instructions, and the weapon's barbed spear was ready to fire. All he had to do was move a little lever with his thumb to unhook the safety, and then squeezing the trigger was the same as any other gun. He'd practiced on a pillow in the basement, late at night when Linda was asleep. She'd really think he was crazy if she found what was left of that tattered old thing. But she thought he was out of his mind anyway, so what did it matter? Ever since he'd told her what he knew was true, she'd looked at him differently. It was in her eyes. She thought he'd slipped right off the deep end. We'll see about that. There was a cold sweat on his face now because the time was near. He started to get out of the station wagon, then froze. His heart was pounding. A police car had turned into the parking lot and was heading toward him. Oh, Jesus, he thought. No. He visualized Linda on the phone to the police. "Officer, my husband's gone crazy. I don't know what he'll do next. He stopped going to work. He has nightmares all the time and can't sleep. And he thinks there's a monster in the Parnell Park swimming pool. He thinks a monster killed our son, and he won't see a doctor or talk to anybody else about—" The police car was getting closer. Glenn hastily wrapped the towel around the spear gun, put it down between the seat and the door. He laid the chain cutter on the floorboard, and then the police car was pulling up right beside him, and all he could do was sit rigidly and smile. "Having trouble, sir?" the policeman on the passenger side asked through his rolled-down window. "No trouble. Just sitting here." Glenn heard his voice tremble. His smile felt so tight his face was about to rip. The policeman suddenly started to get out of the car, and Glenn knew he would see the gear on the back seat. "I'm fine," Glenn protested. "Really." But the police car's door was opening, and the man was about to walk over and see. "Hey, is that you, Mr. Calder?" the policeman sitting behind the wheel asked. The other one hesitated. "Yes, I'm Glenn Calder." "I'm Mark Ward. I bought a cocker-spaniel puppy from you at the first of the summer. Gave it to my little girl for her birthday. Remember?" Yes, sure." Glenn recalled him now. "Yes. How's the puppy?" "Fine. We named him Bozo because of those big floppy feet. I'll tell you, I never knew a puppy so small could eat so much." Glenn strained to laugh. He feared his eyes might be bulging with inner pressure. Mike Ward was silent for a few seconds, and then he'd said something to the other man that Glenn couldn't make out. The second policeman got back into the car and closed the door, and Glenn released the breath he'd been holding. "Everything okay, Mr. Calder?" Mike asked. "I mean, I know about your son, and—" "I'm fine," Glenn said. "Just sitting here, just thinking." His head was about to pound open. "We were here the day it happened," Mike told him. "I'm really sorry. Thank you." The whole hideous scene unfolded again in Glenn's mind. He remembered looking up from his Sports Illustrated magazine and seeing Neil going down the aluminum ladder on the left side of the pool, down at the deep end. "I hope he's careful," Linda had fretted, and then she'd called to him, "Be careful!" Neil had waved and gone on down the ladder into the sparkling blue water. There had been a lot of people there that afternoon. It had been one of the hottest days of the summer. And then Glenn remembered that Linda suddenly set aside her needlepoint, her face shaded by the brim of her straw hat, and said the words he could never forget. "Glenn, I don't see Neil anymore." Something about the world had changed in that moment. Time had been distorted, and the world had cracked open, and Glenn had seen the horror that lies so close to the surface. They brought Neil's body up and tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but he was dead. Glenn could tell that right off. He was dead. and when they turned his body over to try to pound the life back into him, Glenn had seen the small purple bruise at the back of his son's neck, almost at the base of the brain. Oh, God, Glenn had thought. Something stole the life right out of him. And from that moment on, maybe he had gone crazy, because he'd looked across the surface of the pool, and he had realized something very odd. There was no aluminum ladder on the left side of the pool down at the deep end. On the pool's right side there was a ladder, but not on the left. "He was a good boy," Glenn told the two policemen. There was still a fixed smile on his face, and he could not make it let go. "His mother and I loved him very, very much." "Yes, sir. Well, I guess we'll go on then. You sure you're all right? You, haven't been drinking, have you?" "Nope, clean as a whistle. Don't you worry about me. I'll go home soon. Wouldn't want to get Linda upset, would I?" "No, sir. Take care now." Then the police car backed up, turned around in the parking lot, and drove away along the wooded road. Glenn had a splitting headache. He chewed a third Excedrin, took a deep breath, and reached down for the chain cutter. Then he got out of the car, walked to the admissions gate, and cleaved the chain that locked it. The chain rattled to the concrete, and the gate swung open. And now there was nothing between him and the monster in the swimming pool. He returned to the car and threw the clippers inside, shucked off his shoes, socks, and trousers. He let them fall in a heap beside the station wagon, but he kept his blue-striped shirt on. It had been a present from Neil. Then he carried his mask, fins, and snorkel into the pool area, walked the length of the pool, and laid the gear on a bleacher. Rain pocked the dark surface, and on the pool's bottom were the black lines of swimming lanes, sometimes used for area swim meets. Ceramic tiles on the bottom made a pattern of dark blue, aqua, and pale green. There were thousands of places for it to hide, Glenn reasoned. It could be lying along a black line, or compressed flat and smooth like a stingray on one of the colored tiles. He looked across the pool where the false ladder had been. The monster could make itself resemble a ladder, or it could curl up and emulate the drain, or lie flat and still in a gutter, waiting for a human form to come close enough. Yes, it had many shapes, many colors, many tricks. But the water had not yet gone back to the lake, and the monster that had killed Neil was still in there. Somewhere. He walked back to the car, got the underwater light and the spear gun. It was getting dark, and he switched the light on. He wanted to make sure the thing found him once he was in the water, and the light should draw it like a neon sign over a roadside diner. Glenn sat on the edge of the pool and put on his fins. He had to remove his glasses to wear the face mask. Everything was out of focus, but it was the best he could do. He fit the snorkel into his mouth, hefted the underwater light in his left hand, and slowly eased himself over the edge. "I'm ready," he told himself. He was shaking, couldn't stop. The water, untended for more than 2 weeks, was dirty, littered with Coke cups, cigarette butts, dead water bugs. The carcass of a blue jay floated past his face, and Glenn thought that it appeared to have been crushed. He turned over on his stomach, put his head underwater, and kicked off against the pool's side, making a splash that sounded jarringly loud. He began to drift out over the drain, directing the light's yellow beam through the water. Around and beneath him was gray murk, but the light suddenly glinted off something, and Glenn arched down through the chill to see what it was. A beer can on the bottom. Still, the monster could be anywhere. Anywhere. He slid to the surface, expelling water through the snorkel like a whale. Then he continued slowly across the pool, his heartbeat pounding in his ears and the sound of his breathing like a hellish bellows through the snorkel. In another moment his head bumped the other side of the pool. He drifted in another direction, guiding himself with an occasional thrust of a fin. "Come on, damn you," Glenn thought. "I know you're here." But nothing moved in the depths below. He shone the light around, seeking a shadow. "I'm not crazy," he told himself. "I'm really not." His head was hurting again, and his mask was leaking, the water beginning to creep up under his nose. "Come out and fight me, damn you! I'm in your element now, you bastard! Come on!" Linda had asked him to see a doctor in Birmingham. She said she'd go with him, and the doctor would listen. There was no monster in the swimming pool, she'd said, and if there was, where had it come from? Glenn knew. Since Neil's death, Glenn had done a lot of thinking and reading. He'd gone back through the Courier files, searching for any information about the Parnell Park swimming pool. He'd found that for the last 5 years, at least one person had died in the pool every summer. Before that, you had to go back 8 years to find a drowning victim, an elderly man who'd already suffered one heart attack. But it had been in a copy of the Birmingham News, dated October 10th, 6 years ago, that Glenn had found his answer. The article's headline read, "Bright Light Frightens Lake Residents." On the night of October 9th, a sphere of blue fire had been seen by a dozen people who lived around Logan Martin Lake. It had flashed across the sky, making a noise, as one resident put it, like steam whistling out of a cracked radiator. The blue light had gone down into the lake, and for the next 2 days, dead fish washed up on shore. "You found the pipes that brought you up into our swimming pool, didn't you?" Glenn thought, as he explored the gray depths with his light. "Maybe you came from somewhere that's all water, and you can't live on land. Maybe you can suck the life out of a human body just as fast and easy as some of us step on ants. Maybe that's what you live on. But by God, I've come to stick you, and I'll find you if I have to search all—" Something moved. Down in the gloom below him, down near the drain, a shadow, something. Glenn wasn't sure what it was. He just sensed a slow, powerful uncoiling. He pushed the spear gun's safety off with his thumb. He couldn't see anything. Dead bugs floated through the light like a dust storm, and a sudden newspaper page drifted up from the bottom, flapped in his face, and sank out of sight again. Glenn's nerves were near snapping, and he thought with a touch of hysterical mirth that it might have been an obituaries page. He lowered his head and descended. Murky clouds swirled around him. He probed with the light, alert for another movement. The water felt thick, oily, a contaminated feel. He continued to slide down into the depths, and they closed over him. His fins stirred more pool silt, and the clouds refused the light. He stayed down as long as he could, until his lungs began to heave, and then he rose toward the surface like a flabby arrow. When he reached the top, something grasped his head. It was a cold, rubbery thing, and Glenn knew it was the grip of death. He couldn't help it. He shrieked around the snorkel's mouthpiece, twisted violently in the water, and caught sight of slick, green flesh. His frantic movement dislodged the face mask, and water flooded in. He was blinded. Water was pressing up his nostrils, and the thing was wrapped around his shoulders. He heard his gurgling underwater scream, flailed the thing off him, and thrashed desperately away. Glenn kicked at the edge of the pool, raising geysers. The aluminum ladder was in front of him, and he reached up to haul himself out. "No!" he thought, wrenching his hand back before it touched the metal, or what was supposed to pass as metal. That's how it had killed Neil. It had emulated the other ladder and entwined itself around Neil as he entered the water, and it had taken him under and killed him in an instant, while everyone else was laughing and unaware. He swam away from the ladder and hung onto the gutter's edge. His body convulsed, water gurgling from his nostrils. His dangling legs were vulnerable, and he drew them up against his chest so fast he kneed himself in the chin. Then he dared to look around and aim the light at the monster. About 10 feet away, bouncing in the chop of his departure, was a child's deflated rubber ring, the green head of a seahorse with a grinning red mouth lying in the water. Glenn laughed and spat up more of the pool. "Brave man," he thought. "Real brave. Oh, Jesus, if Linda had been here to see this. I was scared shitless of a kid's toy. His laughter got louder, more strident.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?